Hello, my name is Reese, and this is a quick little overview of the invoicing module inside Accelo. Now, you can invoice from many different areas of Accelo. In this instance, I'm going to be invoicing a project to better show some of the different functionalities inside invoicing. But you can also do an invoice straight against a company, invoice a ticket, and also, of course, reoccurring invoicing inside a retainer. So the first thing I want to actually do here is I've got a project here, and I want to give you a little bit of breakdown of kind of where this project sits so that when I proceed to the invoicing panel, you'll be able to better understand what information you're seeing. So if we have a look at this project, we see that in phase one, by the green line, we have a total of 5 hours and 30 minutes of time that's actually been committed as billable time, and only 30 minutes as non-billable, internal work. So that's telling us if I was to bill actuals for this project, what I mean by that is bill only for the work and the exact value of that actual time that I have done so far, it would be working off the 5 hours and 30. Comparing that to the budgeted values here. Each one of these milestones and the tasks within it have budgeted ideals of how long that should take. Now, of course, a lot of projects especially are built out on budgeted value. This is just there for a benchmark of whether that time exceeds or whether you've met budget correctly. So if I was to invoice this project on full budget, I would be looking at 22 hours worth of budget, plus, of course, any materials and expenses that are also there inside the project. Also, what we should be looking at here is looking at kind of work that's been completed, how far along we are in a project, as there are certain functions for doing more percentage of work done or percentage of total project as well. So now that we have an understanding of the work that is actually rendered on this project, how much is budgeted, let's go through to the create function here, through the invoice, which is one of the many areas you can go in a project to create an invoice. And we're presented with this screen. Now, the first things you want to be taking note of is the invoice template. Now, this will be pre-selected based off how the project has been set up. You can designate a invoice template. But by changing these templates, it essentially changes the dynamics and the presets of how to calculate this time, enabling you to have a fixed price template where it is just set budgeted values versus things where there are more actual work rendered, work done, time, materials, and expenses. This can change things such as the invoice title, which gets pre-filled, and even change some things in regards to notes. But then you'll have an owner which defaults to the user that generated this invoice but can be assigned to someone else. And it pre-associates to the bill to contact. And in some instances, the primary contact of a project or of a company is not who you're sending an invoice to, and that can be switched as a default on the project and also the company record. If you want to change who this is going to, maybe a different company that you're billing for work rendered for another company, you can choose to search using this function and also deselect only in this company to look at other companies and other contacts that you're sending this invoice to. Raised and due date are pre-filled based off your payment terms in the settings. A customer description is essentially notes and description field where you can write that will showcase on the actual invoice that is sent, and internal notes, etc., are displayed only for internal use. You also have the ability of having custom fields enabled for invoices so that if there are unique fields, maybe selection boxes and text and date fields you want to have in there in addition to these standard fields, you can set that up also. But let's move down to the bulk of the setup of a invoice. We're going to focus for the moment on this services area and all the information we're seeing here. So the first function is what is the invoice for? Now, Accelo has 4 different ways of invoicing this type of work. The first one, work done, is your actuals, and we'll talk about that a little bit more after we've gone through the others. The next one is percentage budget, which is about the whole budget of the project and just choosing a percentage of that. And percentage complete works in a similar manner, but only looks at the budgeted value of items that have been marked as completed. If you remember back to that previous project plan view, we didn't have any of those milestones completed at this stage, so that no data will be coming through here. But this enables you to use a combination of completing things, but also using a budget invoicing function to kind of marry those two functions together. And the final one is remaining budget, essentially doing your project closure invoice, which takes all the actual budget that hasn't been invoiced so far and pre-fills that there. So the percentage budget is probably the easiest to understand. We understand that this project is 22 hours worth of budgeted time. So when I have 50% in here and we look at the project line, it's currently at 11 hours at that rate. Now, I could actually choose to not be breaking this down by a project, and I can choose to show further detail on this invoice. And I can choose, if I wanted to deselect the project line and do this as itemized lines of the milestone instead, so that it's all showcasing here as individual milestones. By deselecting things here, you're just choosing to omit them from this invoice, essentially. Changing the invoice detail essentially gives you a breakdown of how much detail you want to provide as far as line items. If you want a single line, selecting the project will essentially roll everything here into one line. Milestones gives you the ability to use those milestones as they're set up in the project plan. And milestones and tasks is the greatest detail of them all, showing you both the ability to do the individual milestones, but also invoice for individual tasks within. The markers invoice is a function that when you are invoicing for work here, that once the invoice has been generated, that everything that it has actually rolled up as far as value here is marked as invoiced and kind of locks that time to a degree. We also have another safeguard here, which is about approval of time. Now, approval of time is really here to cover you for actual or work done invoices. This means that when you're looking at invoicing for work rendered, it's only looking at the time that's been approved by, say, a manager, not looking at all the time before it's been checked and ensured it's accurate. Another function for actual time is choosing a log before date. So for instance, if you're doing the invoice at the start of a month, but you only get round to it to say the 4th, you can choose to ensure that all the work done is invoiced from last month and nothing catered for from this month as far as log time. The next functions here is about the default service item. Now, these can all be templated as far as your project plan, but enables you to apply en masse essentially what the service code, which is the tax and the chart of accounts handling of all the items on this particular invoice. Now, of course, you can actually choose per line item to actually manipulate this data. You notice here I'm hovering over this project line. I can not only rename the description, change hours and rate manually. Yes, you have those powers, but you can see over on the right, I have a more details area. So I can maybe change the individual percentage of budget just for this line item if I wanted to. I can see the value of what's been invoiced previously. I can see the current service code, of which I can change for this line item, and thereby see its impact on the ledger and the GST below, which I can change. Now, what I want to talk about is the work done, which is the actual time. So this is really where the breakdown of milestones and tasks become very, very important, because you can be invoicing, and you see here it's pre-selecting only those particular tasks where work is there, and we see that total of the 5.5 hours. Now, at the moment, it's using the standard rates that have been inside the project plan, which are generalized rates. So ones that you've said, this particular task, I wanted the 150 rate, this task I wanted the 300. But you can also change this to even use things as staff rate. So it looks at the rate associated to the staff members and breaks it down and itemizes that as far as that time by staff. You can also choose here to break it down per rate, so you can split out, or if there is a split between maybe 3 hours of that at 150 and an hour and 50 minutes an hour and a half at 300. Of course, you can manipulate this as well. And this is where rewriting things and excluding things from the invoice becomes quite powerful, because of course, if I'm not prepared to invoice for this sign-off plan at this point, deselecting it means that that hour can come back in at a later invoice. It's not writing it off. It's not saying that we're not going to invoice. It's just essentially saying not for now. Now, of course, this can be further rolled up and make this a little bit cleaner. It all comes down to how granular you want to present this to your clients. Now, if I have particular areas where no work is currently being done, by opening it up, it's presented at 0 amount of hours. I can, of course, manually manipulate this data if it's invalid, or if I want to just quickly add a service line, noting that it's not directly associated to the reality of that time being rendered. I can also add new service items as I need. So this can be for variations and things that perhaps have been approved. Use at your own discretion, but you could say random service charge, enabling you to select a quantity and whatever rate you create. I'm applying that there with the save, or removing with the cancel there. The other factors to understand, we'll move back to percentage budget, is that we can actually see the budgeted value, how much has been invoiced so far, and the remaining budget. We can see a current running total of work so far as well. This is including materials and expenses. So we're seeing here, if we invoice for 50% of the project value, which is $500 ex tax, that we would, including this would eventually impact the later invoice I am producing, which would show that we're budgeted $1,000. We've currently invoiced $500, and then we have a remaining $500 to invoice for at a later date. So giving you that quick little insight as far as where you're at in the invoicing really assists you there. So let's move on to materials and expenses. If you've got materials in here, they'll be brought in from the actual project here with the quantities and the sale price set for them. You can also choose to add materials on the fly here as well. And using templates, you can choose to only show materials that have a purchase order against them, or you can actually choose to exclude or include materials until you're ready to invoice them. Expenses as well will be brought in here, and this has a filter here to either show all expenses or to ensure that they are protected by an approval process by whoever is managing the project. So they have to approve the expenses to be on charge. And of course, any expense that is not classed as chargeable or billable will not actually show up here, because it's treated as an internal expense on the project. So then as you actually affect this, you'll get a breakdown of the invoice and what the total is going to appear. You'll then be able to straight away save and send the PDF if you're confident about all the values and how the actual invoice appears. You can also save the invoice to come back to it later and maybe make further alterations if you need to, but you're not ready to send. But you also have preview and edit PDF. And this enables you to dig deeper into the look and feel of the actual of the invoice, enabling you to see exactly how things are going to appear, of course, with the invoice number not yet associated, and adding things like page breaks, expanding how much information is shown on particular line items, changing the style, etc. And also making changes to what's referred to as the work detail and work summary. Now, these are essentially great resources for when you're billing under work done or actual time, as you can actually show a complete history and breakdown of all the actual work that creates those particular figures you're charging for, giving them a breakdown of things by the staff members, by object, showing how many hours, showing rate, showing the subject, and even description, showing everything you want, as little or as less as you need, to make sure that your clients feel confident that when you're billing for actuals, you're billing for the correct time and work that's been rendered. So once you've actually gone and you've edited the invoice however you like, you can choose Save and Send PDF, which will use the templated email activity associated to this invoice template, and send that off. Now, of course, I mentioned work detail. One thing before we do finish up on this is that you can choose to include or not include work detail as it's relevant for your business. So another thing to be aware of, I said there's many ways of actually invoicing in Accelo. Many areas you can go to invoice. This has been invoicing from a project, but another thing you can do is you can do invoicing runs, and that can be done via the company billing option found here in reports. And what this enables you to do, especially if you have scenarios where you have lots of different work items associated to to single clients, is you can actually produce all the actual invoices based off filters and run them in bulk, enabling you to do invoice runs where this particular company, Bob the Builder, with one project and one ticket that require invoicing, I can use the invoicing wizard to essentially finalize these two required invoices in one go and send that out to Bob the Builder as required as a single invoice. Now, there's far more functionality to the company billing module, but do understand that it is there and it creates a very, very efficient way to handle a multitude of invoices that need to be produced, especially on scheduled invoicing dates of your business. That's been a quick overview of the invoicing module and functions in Accelo. My name's Reese, and I hope you've enjoyed what I've explained.